Good evening. Welcome to the Vitamin D, and more vitamin D. Many of you heard me say this for a long time. And what are we going to be looking at this evening? Well, I can tell you that here are some of the learning points that we're going to go over. Why are we so severely deficient in vitamin D? What are some of the sources of vitamin D? What are the toxicity levels? What's the difference between vitamin D3 and vitamin D2? We'll talk about some of the medical conditions affected by low vitamin D levels. We'll talk about what should your levels be, and what are some of the corrective measures that you'll be able to take. This is one of the best cartoons I've ever seen. It was done by Dan Berger, and the concept is from Mike Adams, and Mike Adams has a great newsletter, naturalnews.com. It's a complimentary newsletter. It's a worthwhile signing up. It's complimentary. And if you take a look at the picture here, and here are some of the reasons maybe why we haven't heard the complete truth about vitamin D. Big Pharma, Federal Trade Commission, Corman for the cure of cancer, and they don't even bother talking about the studies that have shown that the higher your vitamin D level, the lower your probability of breast cancer as well as many other cancers. And if you do have breast cancer or other cancers, it's been shown to increase the remission. Oncology, these are the doctors who don't even bother to look at all the studies, and the National Cancer Institute, just some of the places that, and I'm going to add one more to this list, and that's the American Academy of Dermatology. And you can see their statement in the middle. The American Academy of Dermatology does not recommend getting vitamin D from sun exposure, natural or indoor tanning, artificial, because ultraviolet radiation from the sun and tanning beds can lead to the development of skin cancer. Well, this has been their mantra for 35 years. Literally 35 years that's been their mantra. Are they right about it? Well, let's take a look at some definitions before we actually try to figure out. What's a fact? A fact is the quality of being actual. It's snowing outside. You can go outside and you can see if it's snowing. That's a fact. It's 45 degrees outside. You look at your thermometer, that's a fact. What's a theory? A theory takes a bunch of the facts that you have and tries to put it together in explaining it. So, for example, it's the winter and it's 70 degrees. Maybe it's global warming. It's a theory. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying wrong. It's a theory. What's a hypothesis? A hypothesis is a way of testing your theory to see if it's right, to see if the facts that you have in your theory go along, the facts complement your theory. Well, so let's go and look and see how we can apply these principles to what the American Academy of Dermatology says. Their theory is sun exposure leads to increased skin cancer rates. And their hypothesis is that sun exposure increases skin cancer rate. That's their hypothesis based on that theory. Let's look at the facts. Are we in the sun more or less today? It's an absolute fact we're in the sun less today. Do we use more or less sunscreen? I think it's an absolute fact we use more sunscreen. And here's the third one that they even agree to. Is there more or less skin cancer today? They themselves say there's more. And so what that means is the facts do not seem to agree with their theory. Therefore, we must question their hypothesis that sun exposure leads to increased rates of skin cancer. Well, I tell you why this is important. Because it may lead to one of the serious problems that we have, and that is severe vitamin D deficiency. There's obviously the most obvious place you can get vitamin D. It's called the sunshine vitamin, and as you'll learn over the next hour, it's really not a vitamin. It's not even a hormone. It's a hormone modulator. And I even have a few slides that are a year or two old that talk about it as a hormone. It's not. And sun is obviously the most, it's the sunshine vitamin. Let's keep the terminology, even though it's wrong. But then let's take a look at some of the other things. We can get it from fish, but you can't eat the fish because most of it's contaminated. You get it from mushrooms if you want to gamble that the mushrooms you're getting aren't wild mushrooms. They have a problem. And the last one you can get them is from supplements, and that most probably makes the most sense. And I'm going to argue that our best combination that we want is a combination of sunlight and supplementation. If you take a look at some ads that we've known the value of vitamin D for a long time. We may not have known the specifics, but here's an ad from, it's got to be 56 years ago from Schlitz, the beer that made Milwaukee famous. Look at the top here. This beer contains sunshine vitamin D. And if you take a look at some of their ad campaigns that they've had throughout the ages, they said, in the summertime, go out in the sun, and you can get your vitamin D. In the winter, drink Schlitz all winter. Well, I'm not sure if that's politically correct, but we can see that maybe they knew more years back than we do now. What are the amounts of vitamin D that you get? I got this from a journal article, or an article, and you take a look here, and this is kind of important because if you take a look at the current recommendations for vitamin D, they're actually a little bit higher, but look how low they are. And they believe the upper limit should be no more than 2,000, if you take a look over here. And many experts believe 3,000, but look at the very last column there. And this is, many vitamin D experts suggest that 10,000 is the new upper limit. Now, I don't believe that 10,000 is the upper limit. I think there's enough evidence that it may be the middle limit. And really, it turns out that what's the right amount of vitamin D? Whatever it takes in order to raise your level, a minimum to 60 to 80 nanograms per ml. And we'll see these numbers and explain them a little bit later. Let me tell you one other thing. Almost everything we know about vitamin D has been learned in the last 10 years. So you're not going to see very many studies that say 1999 or even 2000. They're going to be 2007, 2009, 2010, 2011, and we even have some studies in 2012. So you understand why so many doctors are so reluctant to increase vitamin D levels, because they can't wrap themselves around how wrong it was when they were recommending 300 or 400 units when it may be 6,000, 8,000, or 10,000 we need to raise our levels to adequate levels. This is a study in 2009 which shows that not only are most Americans lacking in vitamin D, but it's gotten worse. Between 1988 and 1994, 45% of the people who were examined had nanograms 30 or more. By a decade later, you can see once again the studies are now in the 2000s, 23% of those surveyed had at least that amount, 30 or more. And 30 is not very good. It's really a relatively small amount. Let's go to children. And this is a 2008 article in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. And they found that children need 10 times as much as they're getting. Wow. And so they're giving 200, they say 2,000, but that even itself may be too low a level. And Dr. Bruce Hollis, who I've been very privileged to have met, has done lots of work on vitamin D, and he's done a lot with vitamin D and nursing, and he found that the nursing requirements is a minimum of 6,000 minimum. And I recommend nursing mothers get at least 10,000 a day, at least. That's a minimum. And that's something, if any of the doctors who are involved here on the call, or you can talk to your doctor, vitamin D testing should be a requirement for a prenatal screening, blood work. I delivered babies for almost 40 years, and it was only the last couple of years that I realized that the few babies that I still am involved with the birth, I always make sure that they have their vitamin D levels testing. I'm now heavily involved, as many of you know, with metabolic syndrome, HCG program, weight loss, and dealing with blood pressure, cholesterol, elevated blood sugars, and vitamin D is a core of the blood work that we do and a core of the treatment program. Is there a difference between vitamin Ds? Yes, there's multiple different vitamin Ds, and the one that the body recognizes, the one that the body makes when you're exposed to the sun, is vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, not vitamin D2. And there's a study to show that vitamin D2 is ergocalciferol. It has to be metabolized to another form in order to become vitamin D3. And just this one study here that was in 2004 shows that it is 1/10 as potent. That's vitamin D2 is vitamin D3. And vitamin D3 comes typically in a 50,000 IU dose. That means the 50,000 IU dose is the equivalent of 5,000. And most doctors, when they recommend giving vitamin D, they only recommend giving the 50,000 D2 once a week. It's preposterous. Once again, to really know what you're doing, you've got to measure the levels to see what it is. Let's talk about toxicity, vitamin D toxicity. Is it a reality? Well, here's one of the few studies that was done more than 10 years ago. It was done by Dr. Veit, and I had the pleasure of meeting him when I was in Canada a few years ago. And he did a lot of the work, and it was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And Dr. Veit, he attempted, look at the bottom here, to dispel unwarranted fears in the medical community of physiological doses of vitamin D with his exhaustive and well-reviewed literature. And what he showed was that you could take 40,000 a day. Take a look at the middle paragraph. 40,000 a day for several years, and it won't create a problem. 40,000 a day for several years, and they want to say that 2,000 is the upper limit. What an absolute joke. And here's another graph showing this was also in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2007, and here we get another measurement, nanomoles. And if you want to write this down, nanomoles are they're a European standard. It's also in Canada. You have to take nanomoles and multiply it by 0.4, and that will give you nanograms. So you see here it says no toxicity below 500. You multiply 500 by 0.4, you get 200 nanograms. I've only seen one person who has a level over 200, and even that's not problematic. One out of the thousands that I have tested. And doctors go nuts when they see levels of 120, 130, 140. I think those are excellent levels, and those are the levels that we want to strive for. All right, so what are some of the recommendations that I have for vitamin D? Pregnant and nursing mothers, at least 10,000. Children and adolescents, at least 2,000 to 3,000. Adults, 5,000 to 10,000, and I'll give you how you come up with how much you take. Adults with chronic illness, at least 10,000. And an adult, in my mind, means anyone over 100 pounds. Adults with colds and flu, 50,000 for 3 to 5 days, or the newer, better way of looking at it, 1,000 units per pound per day, which means if you weigh about 100 pounds, you're going to want to take 100,000, 200 pounds, 200,000, and that's if you have a cold or a flu, or you feel a cold or a flu is coming on, or like I recommend, if you're getting on the airplane, you're putting yourself in a precarious type of situation, I would recommend you take at least 50 to 100,000 before you get on a plane. The 25-hydroxy-D blood test can determine your levels of vitamin D, and 100 units will raise your blood level approximately 1 nanogram. So let's say you have 30 and you want to raise it to 80, you're going to have to take about 5,000 units a day more. It's kind of just a litmus test, because the bottom line is you want your range to be minimum. The 60 to 80 here is minimum 60 to 80. And chronic conditions, 80 to 100. What does it mean, chronic condition? High blood pressure, high cholesterol, muscle and joint pain, diabetes, cancer. I don't care what you have. You want a minimum. In fact, I like that 100 to really be the low end level, not the upper level. And here we have, I put together for the a little example of the cold and flu season, and you're going to hear, and we'll talk about for about 5 or 10 minutes about take vitamin D, not the flu shot. But here's some of the recommendations. Make sure your family is above 60 to 80. Adults, children greater than 100 pounds, you want to take 10,000 a day, and that's what I think is the under 100 pounds, 5,000. And the Pro D is our brand of vitamin D. It has we have a 5,000 and a 50,000. That's the Pro D5 and Pro D50. What's the Pro? It stands for probiotics. We'll have a few slides on probiotics and the benefits and value of probiotics, because you'll see many of the benefits of vitamin D in helping with many chronic conditions as well as cancer can just as well be applied to probiotics. That's why we've always put the two together. And the last one, of course, chicken soup. That's a value. Here's a list of some of the conditions that are helped by vitamin D and probiotics. You can see how similar that list is. Less cavities. It's not only for bones, less flu and colds, less back pain, less falls, less cancer, live longer, more than just rickets, less autism. And I don't have a couple of newer ones here because those studies are just a year old and I didn't update this slide. And it's lower your vitamin D level, or let's put it this way, the higher your vitamin D level in a calorie-restricted program like our Eisenstein protocol, the more weight you lose. And probiotics has the same thing. You can see so many of the treatments with probiotics mimic those of making those a they're the same, less colon cancer, but it's more than just colon cancer. My wife Karen's going to join us. She'll help answer some questions. So as soon as she signs in, we'll be able to. You can start asking your questions, and I'll go over exactly how you do that in a minute. Vitamin D, not the flu shots, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that all means. Vitamin D, flu, and common cold. Dr. John Cannell, who's the head of the Vitamin D Council. It's a fabulous website, vitamindcouncil.org, just the way it's spelled there, and has a great newsletter and an enormous amount of information about vitamin D. And he was one of the first people to recognize there may be a relationship between vitamin D and colds and flu. And take a look at the bold there. The winter increase in colds and flu may be attributed to low seasonal vitamin D levels. And he was the first person to talk about higher doses of vitamin D for a cold and flu. And here's another study. So that was in 2009. And I told you almost all the studies that you're going to see are okay. Almost all the studies that you're going to see are ones that were just in the last couple of years. Oh, here we go. Now I found my wife, and I'm going to be able to make her an organizer. Make her an organizer. Give me 1 second. Yes, she's an organizer now. Ta-da! As an organizer, you can now ask your questions. It's just type your questions in, and Karen will be happy to help you uh, um, answer some of the questions. Believe me, she knows more than I do about this. I mean, we've lived this together for the last 5 or 6 years. I've known about this before even I got involved with our HCG program, and I can tell you something interesting. I weighed about, as many of you know, over 350 pounds. And I've taken high doses of vitamin D, high doses of probiotics, high doses of digestive enzymes, multivitamins for many, many years. It wasn't until I put it together with the HCG program and a calorie-restricted program. Now, if any of you are trying to lose weight, I don't care what program you use, it is critical that you include a nutritional supplement program. Any calorie-restricted program, it doesn't make any difference which one it is. If you add the nutraceuticals, vitamin D, probiotics, digestive enzymes, and multivitamins, you will enhance your weight loss. It'll work even better. Once again, this is a study here that shows that low vitamin D levels are linked to colds. And let's see what just okay, here we go. And here's some kind of fun type of stuff. I've always liked fun stuff. Flu shots are silly. This is when I was at the Disney World with some of my grandchildren, and I said that pirates didn't lack vitamin D because they were in the sun all the time. But maybe it's because they drank rum that was fortified with vitamin D. And vitamin D, low vitamin D linked to a metabolic syndrome. And this was an article of 2010, the American Journal of Nutrition, that Dr. Cannell also started looking at vitamin D as a flu fighter. Actually protects you against the flu. And here's something that we all know empirically. It's not called a cold because you get it in the summer. It's called a cold because you get in the winter. And you can take a look at there's epidemiologic evidence that vitamin D deficiency is the season stimulus. Now, what is the definition of evidence? It doesn't mean it's 100% true. It means it's another piece of evidence. And if you have enough evidence, you can put together a hypothesis, and then you take the hypothesis and it becomes a theory, and then you verify the theory. Unlike the American Academy of Dermatology, who has this preposterous theory that the sun causes skin cancer. Well, you can hold that theory, but you have to prove it, and they surely haven't have any evidence that that makes a difference. Here's another very interesting piece of work that was done in 2008, and this is by Cedric Garland and Dr. Cannell, and take a look at the difference with even low, the very first column shows you people who had no vitamin D supplementation and the number of colds they got in the winter, and those who had even 800 units, how little they got, and 2,000 virtually didn't exist. Literally virtually didn't exist. 2,000 units and they virtually didn't get any. And you can see there's no really difference that much in the spring or summer because most of us don't get colds in the summer, spring, or autumn months. More evidence, and you know, they scared us in 2009 just like they scared us in 1976, and I've been in practice long enough to have those same nonsensical scares from the government. And if you want to go, you can go on YouTube onto my channel. Just put in Dr. Eisenstein and swine flu. I did a webinar that's available on YouTube. It was one flu vaccine over the cuckoo's nest. You know, we talked extensively about this. But this was Dr. Norris Click, happens to be a classmate of mine. And in 2009, he was the head of a long-term care facility. And take a look. He said he had these were sickly people, and they virtually had no swine flu. Yet in the staff, there was widespread swine flu in the staff, not in it, because why? He was supplementing them with vitamin D. At least that's the theory. You know, Dr. Ellie Campbell a family practice doctor, had the same type of results. Interesting, she shared an office with another doctor. They didn't have the same practice. And what she found was in her practice, which they supplement vitamin D, and she maintained her patients with 2,000 to 5,000 at levels of 50 to 80, virtually no swine flu. And there was an outbreak there, and he was seeing 10 cases a week. There's also lots of facts that were suggestive that vitamin D was protective against the flu of 1918. And you can just take a look at this list, and I'm just going to read you one or two of them. The sailors had less swine flu in 1918 than the ones the people who were in the trenches, because remember, this is World War I going on. And even though there's crowded conditions, and they had no idea, the crowded condition most probably had nothing to do with it. It was more that those people who were involved got sunlight had less swine flu. Take a look at the underground coal miners right over here. Underground coal miners had the highest mortality. See, these are facts that help you with your theory. It doesn't tell you it's true. It just gives you more evidence that it's true. And I just threw in the probiotics here, and I'm going to do a webinar just on probiotics. And you can see that daily dietary probiotic supplementation for 6 months was a safe, effective way to reduce rhinorrhea, that's runny nose, cough incidence, and the cough incidence duration. So it's kind of very interesting, Let's go over again some of the my recommendations, and that is for the cold and flu season. We're right here in the cold and flu season, and boy, as an attorney, I get so many, even though I don't really practice law, but I try to help people with vaccine issues. And the biggest issue I'm having are nurses who are being forced to get swine flu vaccine, or not swine, but it's actually flu vaccine with the H1N1 component in it, and they aren't allowed them to work. Absolutely unconscionable. This is an unproven theory that it makes any difference, and they're going ahead and they're doing something like that. But here's what I want you to recommend. I recommend that at the first sign of a cold or a flu, 1,000 units per pound per day for 3 to 5 days. You can take a little bit longer if you want. You saw that 40,000 a day for years will not cause toxicity. This is going to raise your levels, but it surely won't cause toxicity. And so once again, if you're 50 pounds, you could take 50,000, 100,000, and each one of our Pro D50s has 50,000. And of course, chicken soup. And here's my recommendation for adults. I recommend at least 10,000. And really, the real recommendation, you go to the bottom of the screen, it's whatever gets your blood levels to at least 60 to 80. And I really like 80 to 100 better than 60 to 80, but at least 60 to 80. What I have found in people who I haven't met before, who I'm privileged to become their doctor, I find their levels are 5 and 10 and 15. We have the lowest numbers you can imagine. And it's not us. It's also so many people around the country have the same thing. You're going to see this chart in a minute, because this chart is really, really valuable when we talk about vitamin D and chronic illness like cancer. And this shows you that the higher levels of vitamin D are protective, theoretically, against many forms of cancer. All right, and here's can low vitamin D, is it the root cause of cancer and chronic illness? And if you take a look at this, if you look at blood levels, and you got all these type of, this is that same graph now put into another format. Take a look at the difference. The higher the level of vitamin D, the lower the probability, and so, take a look at here. If you, incidence compared to normal, I'm looking at this and trying to figure this graph out now. But let me tell you something. We'll look at it later. That the lower the vitamin D level is. That's the incidence. This is the incidence of the disease on this line. Okay, good. So if you're like 14 or 15, you got a 50% increase chance of rickets, as opposed to coming down here, you have almost no incidence of rickets. Same thing here. Type 1 diabetes, if your level is under 40, it's like 50%. If it's closer to 60, it's like 20%, you know, and on and even more. There's a consistently strong inverse correlation with solar UVB rays for 15 types of cancer. This work was done by Dr. Bill Grant, a wonderful former NASA scientist who I had the pleasure of meeting multiple times, and he's kind of an epidemiologist, and which means that the higher your vitamin D levels, the lower your probability for 15 types of cancer. Look at the conclusion. The evidence for the UVB vitamin D cancer hypothesis is very strong in general and for many types of cancer in particular. And once again, we go back to the word hypothesis. This is taking some of the facts and coming up with a hypothesis and seeing and testing it to see if it's true. And you test it with the groups of people, as opposed to the American Academy of Dermatology. They've never tested their hypothesis. They just made the decision that the sun causes skin cancer without testing it. And one of the best tests would be, do we have more skin cancer or less skin cancer? Are we in the sun more today or less today? You know, well, the answers to that are blatantly obvious. 58,000 cases of cancer can be prevented if you raise your vitamin D levels to 40 to 60. And then I have it also in nanomoles. It's incredible. 58,000 cases of cancer, 49,000 cases of colorectal cancer. These numbers are staggering because if you want to talk a true healthcare system, it's the government giving us 5,000 or 10,000 units of vitamin D a day. That should be the handout. That should be the stimulus. It costs peanuts. It'll most probably cost the government somewhere between $50 and $60 million. And the lowering of healthcare costs will approach $1 trillion. Kind of a 20-to-1 return on investment. That's healthcare put to good use, not the nonsense of Obamacare. That's just going to raise healthcare costs. It's going to make us sicker. Won't make any difference. Led by Dr. Garland, and he's got this theory, a new theory. Once again, it's a theory of why vitamin D lowers cancer rates, and he called it the dynamite theory, and it differs substantially from the current model of cancer developed, which suggests genetic mutation. He believes that the vitamin D is kind of like causes the cells to stick together, and as they stick together, they don't have a chance of changing into cancerous type of material. So is it possible that low vitamin D may be the root cause of cancer? And once again, you see that this is a study. The other one was just kind of an outline of what he did. And you can see that 2009, again, just in the last 2 or 3 years, you know, and his theory, and he looked at more than 200 epidemiologic studies and found that it seems that, once again, low vitamin D level has been correlated with higher incidence of cancer. And I just threw in one here about probiotics because it seems that probiotics have the same effect. And I really believe that it's something we also don't get in our diet, because our food used to be made edible by a process called fermentation, using the probiotic bacteria to kill off all the bad bacteria. Now we do instead of fermentation, we do pasteurization, where you kill everything. Everything's killed. So you got sterile food, essentially. And so that's just another way of looking at it. Now here's the graph that I told you about, which I think really valuable. This was put together by grassrootshealth.net. By Carol Baggerly, and they put 30 studies together, you know, and they came up with a model of looking at, and take a look at cancer all combined, the very top line there. If your level is 38, you have a 35% reduction. But if you raise it to 52, you have like a 75% reduction. Next line, breast cancer, 50% if you're 52, 67% if you're 64. And we're not talking about age, we're talking about, who we're talking about your blood level in nanograms. And you take a look at what's the average person runs somewhere here, somewhere between 20 and 30. Well, I tell you, not even close to all the benefits of fractures, falls, multiple sclerosis. All of those have greater value as your levels go up. And we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. We really, in my mind, don't know what the ultimate right levels should be. These are the smile curves. And what are the smile curves? It shows you the incidence of type 1 diabetes. We could show this with almost every chronic illness. The zero latitude is the equator, right in the bottom there. The further you get away from the equator, the higher the incidence of type 1 diabetes. And you'll see we can do that with all cancers, multiple sclerosis, autism. It's almost across the board that it has this type of effect. And here's the same looking chart with multiple sclerosis, and you can take a look where it starts really, the curve starts going up incredibly. It's somewhere around latitude about 30 or 35, right about over here. And so the question is, what does that relate to? And let's take a look at here. 35 takes us right about, not even to the top of Texas, right about over here. It's about 35. I got too many things over my, and so you can see that unless you live below there, you're not going to get very much from the sun, because the angle of the sun changes as you get further up in latitude or further down past the equator, and the benefits become less and less. Another way of looking at it with cancer rates are looking at, and the red is the worst. And interesting, you can see a few pockets of red there in southern Florida. And when they looked at that, you know what they found? Those are almost all people who lived up north and moved later on in life to southern Florida. But the same type of thing you can see, that the higher up you are, the higher the incidence of cancer. And the same thing here. Now we look at prostate cancer. You can look at these graphs over and over again, and they show you exactly the same thing over and over again. The higher up you live, and take a look at Alaska over there in the corner, it's a completely red state. This has nothing to do with Democrat or Republican. You can see the darker the color, the higher the incidence of cancer it is. Let's see, did I miss one? No, that's prostate, breast, colon. Another way of looking at it, just graphically, and this is risk of colon and rectal cancer, and the odds ratio is reduced the higher your level gets. So once again, if you look over here, this is a very the odds ratio of developing it, and here is the level in nanograms. You can see even a relatively small amount, you reduced your risk by a substantial amount, because this is like 23, 24, 23. It's not a very high number, but it's enough to most probably make a difference. And now here we're looking at, let's see, this one is colorectal cancer, same thing. It's the same type of thing you can see, just another format. At the higher the level, the lower the probability of developing cancer. And this one here is with breast cancer, but you can see that the level is higher as we looked at that chart before. If you want to lower your level by substantially, this is the 50% at 45 nanograms. Get up to 60 or 70, you lower it I think about 75%. I can't see it. It's covering up here. But higher levels of vitamin D are going to lower your probability of chronic illness. And just look at it. Here's renal cancer, same smile, which means if you're by the equator, you're going to be smiling. If you're not by the equator, you got more problems. 2008. Study, vitamin D from dietary intake and sunlight exposure and the risk of hormone receptor-defined cancer. And what they found was evidence has emerged for a role of vitamin D in the development of breast cancer. And there's some suggestion that higher vitamin D levels may be associated with a reduction in the rates of breast cancer. More and more studies, all once again. And why in Ontario, Canada? Because they have a higher rate of breast cancer than everywhere than we are than America. Vitamin D winter. Very little, if any, vitamin D can be synthesized in the skin from November through February at latitudes north of 37 degrees. I wanted to show you this in an easier way and see where you live. If you live below 37, you're better off. But of course, you still have to be outside. You still have to be outside in order to get a vitamin D. And you have to about have 60% of your clothes off, and you have to be there between 10 and 2. And it only takes about 10 or 15 minutes with 60% of skin exposure to get 10 or 15,000 units of vitamin D. So even the American Academy of Dermatology may agree, although I don't think so. They're so far behind at times, that you don't have to be out all day long, 10 or 15 minutes. But they've scared everyone so much that if you're in the sun, you're going to develop cancer. Well, I'm just bringing back the slide that we saw a little while back, and that was the vitamin D, the benefits of vitamin D and probiotics, all of them, a substantial number of things. Now I want to take a look at some of the conditions that vitamin D seems to make a difference. And here may be the central tying fact together. And this is a study that was done literally just a few months ago. It was in the American International Journal of Obesity, October 2011. And once again, as I said, almost all the studies have been done in the last less than 10 years. Vitamin D increases telomerase activities. Now, I didn't even know what telomeres were a few months ago. Take a look at the top here. Telomeres are regions at the end of a chromosome which protect the end of it from deterioration. The longer, the better. That's the operative word. Go to the second paragraph. Over time, due to numerous cell divisions over your lifetime, the telomeres become shorter. And the third paragraph, telomerase deficiency is associated with aging, death, obesity, cardiovascular disease, depression, and diabetes. Here's the most exciting that Dr. Shu found. The authors found, this next to the last paragraph, that vitamin D increased telomerase activity by 19%. The authors wrote in their paper. And they found that as vitamin D is the repair and maintenance man of the human body. When you think about it, of all the things vitamin D does, it usually works by repairing and maintaining the human body. Here's the fascinating thing. They didn't give that much vitamin D. They gave 60,000 per month. Take a look here at the, right here, 60,000 units per month. Well, let's divide it by 30. It's 2,000 a day. I wonder if they did the same study and gave 5,000 or 10,000 a day. They also didn't report on what their vitamin D levels were. I have a feeling the increase would be not 19%, but maybe 30, 40, or 50%. No matter what, very fabulous type finding. Lack of vitamin D may worsen a chronic pain. 2007 study. This is done in the Mayo Clinic, and they found that people, the higher your vitamin D level, the people needed less morphine. These are people who suffered from chronic pain, and here's the source of it. 2007, American Society of Anesthesiologists. That's where the study was found. Vitamin D linked to asthma exacerbation. This reported in the American Academy of Allergy and Asthma. Low vitamin D level poses larger threat to health. Overall, 26% increased risk of death from vitamin D, low vitamin D level. This research was done at Johns Hopkins. Take vitamin D and live longer. And this was a study in the Archives of Internal Medicine. And once again, you'll find, and I don't see the data on this, but this is all in the last couple of years. And the bottom line is people taking vitamin D were 7% less likely to die during the study. Vitamin D versus colds, and we looked at that a little bit before. And this was a study in the Archives of Internal Medicine which showed that people who took vitamin D were less likely to develop colds. Vitamin D is protective against heart disease. 2008 study, by Dr. Ed Giovannucci, the Harvard Public School, and it's over and over again. It may be what we looked at a little bit earlier with the telomerase activity. That's what explains that the vitamin D kind of puts a cap on your chromosomes, doesn't let the telomeres shrink. Low vitamin D level tied to higher blood pressure, from the American Journal of Hypertension, July 2007. Or put it the other way, if you have higher levels of vitamin D, it may be a treatment for blood pressure. And I met a professor, a doctor on the University of Kentucky Medical School, who said when someone comes into him who has high blood pressure, the first thing he does before he does any type of pharmaceutical treatment and puts him on 10,000 units of vitamin D a day, and he said 40 to 50% after 1 month no longer have high blood pressure. Very interesting. And I've got some case studies that go along with that also. Low vitamin D raises teens' risk of diabetes, 2009 study. Fertility. It's been shown that vitamin D also will increase sperm motility. This is from the June 2011 Journal of Human Reproduction. And once again, if you want to look at it more carefully, it'll be archived. You can read the studies or look them up later on. Vitamin D insufficiency linked to increased body fat. The 2008 study. Vitamin D insufficiency is associated with increased body fat and decreased height, but not with changes in peak bone mass, which means that the lower your vitamin D level is, the more your percentage of body fat. This one was very fascinating, and this is a 2008 study showing that maternal vitamin D status will have an effect on cavities in the unborn baby. The higher the vitamin D level of the mother at the time of giving birth, the lower the probability of her child developing cavities. Look at the conclusion. This study shows for the first time that maternal vitamin D levels may have an influence on the primary dentition and the development of, oh God, I got to look at the acronym there. It's for cavities, it's got the acronym there somewhere. Vitamin D and mental health. Study recently in the Journal of Geriatric Psychology and Neurology. And likewise, I met a professor, a psychiatrist, at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine conference. It's about 5 years ago. And she told me that she does similar to what the doctor in Kentucky did. She would put anyone who walked into her office who had depression, she would put them on 5,000 units of vitamin D for 1 month. It would come back later, a month later. This is depression. She said that 50% of them no longer had depression. I couldn't get over that. This was before anyone was doing 5,000. And boy, it really had an influence on what I started recommending. Vitamin D tied to muscle power in adolescent girls. And so everyone who's involved with any type of athletic program, any program, it doesn't make a difference. What a chance of increasing your team. And this is not only girls, it just happens to be the study was done on girls. And interesting, the Chicago Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago, and the doctor was, their team doctor supplemented them all with vitamin D. Very interesting, did it cause them to win? Well, maybe a little bit, but they also had very good players. Adults in southern Arizona are commonly deficient in vitamin D. And this kind of debunks the belief that just because you live in a southern state, because most of these people weren't out in the sun. Women with fertility problems should look no further than the sun. Another study, this was from the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. It was about a year or two ago. And look at the bottom paragraph here. Given the pandemic of vitamin D insufficiency, if indeed our observations are substantiated, aggressive repletion with vitamin D may emerge as an alternative approach to facilitate ovulation resumption with minimal to no risk for ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome or multiple pregnancy. How incredible. Remember the slide I showed you just a few minutes ago, the combination of men's sperm being stronger and now possibly better ovulation. Let's go over the recommendations again because I think it's kind of important. Whatever it takes, go to the very bottom line, to raise your blood level to at least 60 to 80 nanograms. That's the operative word. The reason I say 10,000 because we found that's what it usually takes, about 10,000. And with children, about 5,000. Whatever it takes to raise your level to a minimum of 60 to 80. And my preference is 80 to 100. Having been in school for college, medical school, public health school, law school, 100 is always a good exam number. So that's why I like 100 also. Let's see. Wait, did I... There we go. Vitamin D and autism. And this is, as many of you know what my work has been, that I'm convinced that true autism is about 1 in 10,000. That's what I saw when we were in practice 40 years ago. But what we're seeing today is brain damage from vaccines. And I'm going to show you a couple of studies that were done years ago which show that underlying the vaccine issue may be also an issue of increase in autism with low vitamin D levels. And this was doctors in Sweden, so again, a 2008 study. We're looking for more vitamin D, a mixed link between lack of sunshine and increase in rate of autism. They thought maybe there was a connection between the two. I don't have to tell anyone, no one will argue with this graph showing that we've had an incredible increase in autism, and there hasn't been a change that much in our vitamin D levels that can explain that. But I want to show you one more slide that may explain this, and I think this is Dr. Grant did this work. The result presented here for season of birth and prevalence of autism, and take a look at the latitude, because we looked at that a little bit earlier, that remember 35 was right around top of Texas, but if you take a look, you can almost correlate the incidence of autism with how you lived up in latitude. And just give you an idea what the latitude means. You know, you can here you can see it a little bit better, that when you get to Canada, you're getting to about 50. So let's go backwards for a second. And 50, you can see the massive increase in autism from 50 all the way down. And we look at these numbers. These are pretty small numbers. This is per 100,000. And it used to be 1 in 10,000, you know, but you can see that the numbers, and so underlying, in my mind, the vaccine issue is the idea that the higher you are in latitude, the higher the probability of neurological damage, autism. It just goes along with all chronic type of problems. And this is what, once again, I showed you again, the graph. Now it becomes more sense to look at it, that the higher your vitamin D level is, the lower your probability of chronic type of illness. And my recommendations, again, which we've talked about multiple times. And this is the recommendations for cold and flu. Once again, 1,000 units per pound per day. But going back just for a minute to this one, once again, whatever it takes to get your levels at least 60 to 80, preferable 80 to 100. A couple of testimonials. I kind of like testimonials. Testimonials is evidence. And, you know, I tell you how they described it in law school, evidence. Evidence was like putting nails in a coffin to get the coffin to be shut down real tight. The more nails you had in it, the more likely the coffin was not to open up. That's what testimonials are to a doctor. Every time you hear something, it's one little bit more of evidence as to, and here's someone who talks about the 50,000 units of vitamin D and how they used it and immediately took it, and they got well almost instantly. I've been giving these multivitamins to my son, and the probiotics seem to be helping him with constipation. The vitamin D that's included is keeping him healthy while his classmates are all getting flu and cold. Everyone should be taking these. Our multivitamin has 2,000 units of vitamin D. Our men's and women's and children and our prenatal has 4,000. Not as much as I recommend, but about 5 times more than any other multivitamin on the market. I have to say that your vitamin D is amazing. I give it to my almost 3-year-old, and I've started taking it on a daily basis. When both of us start getting symptoms of the cold or flu, we do the higher strength, and it's gone within 24 hours. Now you just have to come up with something to help with weight loss. Let me tell you, Cindy, this is about 2 years old. I haven't read this in about 2 years. Cindy, if you're listening, I have something. It's helped me, and it's helped over 1,000 of my patients now lose more than 20 tons. I love it. I didn't come up with it, but I'm a good copycat. When I see somebody else, that's something that works, I always like it. And this is from Ron, and he talks about blood pressure. And this, I met Ron just after I met that professor in Kentucky and was overwhelmingly impressed by the vitamin D and blood pressure. And my God, almost instantly I found someone who, he listened to the doctor in Kentucky who I had on the radio. And once again, looking at the recommendations of vitamin D. Once again, the operative word is the bottom. Get your vitamin D level tested. You want to make sure your levels are at least 60 to 80, preferably 80 to 100. It's unlikely that you're going to need less than 5 or 10,000 units a day. Even if you're in the sun, get it tested, because it's going to be less than you can imagine most of the time. And once again, here's the recommendation for the cold and flu season. That's the 1,000 units per pound per day. It's a bottle of our sunshine in the bottle. That's what we call it. And we have the Pro D. That's the probiotics with the vitamin D. It's available on our website. But let me tell you, there's lots of vitamin D. I happen to think ours is the best, but there's lots of vitamin D available on the market. Thank you. I want to thank everyone very much. I got just a couple of announcements. I hope this helped you. Once again, it will be archived shortly.